today for the conversation. I'm just going to pull up my slides and then we can get started. I'm actually joining you from the very far north part of the island, the North Antrim coast, for those of you that have made it up this far. Normally I live and work in New York, but for me, definitely one of the silver linings of the pandemic was being able to come back home and work remotely for the last few months. So yeah, great to be here and great to be joining you for this conversation. Now, for those of you that know LHH and for those of you that don't, we specialize in helping people through, and helping people through the key career transitions that they experience. And that could be transitions when they leave an organization, but it could also be the transitions that occur when we, for instance, grapple with leadership for the first time or learn a new skill. And what a year it has been to be supporting organizations in this way. We are seeing such a shift in just how we're all thinking about our careers. And whilst a lot of this has been accelerated by the pandemic and things like unemployment rates rising, just 10% in Ireland compared to this time last year, I think there are other shifts that we were already seeing before the pandemic hit. So sources predicting that for people entering today's world of work, they can expect to have 5 different careers in that time. So not just 5 different jobs, but 5 different careers. The life expectancy of a Fortune 500 company now is on average 18 years versus 60 or 70 years as it would have been, maybe a few decades ago. And then if you think about our younger generation entering work after graduation, again, what we're seeing is that they're typically changing jobs 4 times in that first 10 years of their career. So all of this is leading to a much more fluid experience of work and experience of our jobs. And I think we really need to consider how do our mindsets and our skills now match up against that new experience. And the other thing that we have to take into account is that our expectations of work have also changed. This is summary of some research that was carried out by our parent company, Adecco, in the first half of 2020. And they actually sampled people at 3 different time points. So before the pandemic, in the midst of the pandemic, and then towards the end of the lockdown period when people were starting to come back to a little bit of normal. And some of the themes that came out of that, and they were really wanting to measure how have people's expectations of work changed. And there was 5 key themes. One, this notion of more hybrid working. So we've all proven that we can work in a more flexible way, and hopefully many of us have experienced some of the benefits of that. So how do we then make that more a part of work going forward? So more of a flexibility between remote and office working. The second was this notion of, goodbye to the 9 to 5. So instead of focusing on hours worked or presenteeism, instead thinking about output. And what was really encouraging I found with this research was that even 75% of C-suite individuals who were sampled said that they would be happy to see the end of this 9 to 5 culture. Leadership, I think, has also had a light shone on it in terms of our expectations. And, I think we all probably, have always wanted our leaders to be empathetic and to lead with EQ. But again, I think the pandemic has helped to bring this to the fore and really shine a light on how important this is. Then this idea of upskilling. So again, as the world becomes more and more unpredictable, there's this more recognition that actually we need to be learning new skills on a fairly continual basis, and not just the kind of tech and digital skills, but also some of the soft skills and being able to, for instance, manage remote teams. And then the final trend that came out of this was actually, as we perhaps in different parts of the world where our trust in politicians or in government has waned maybe in the last year. And I won't say anything about America where I normally live. But what the consequence of that has been is that we actually put more trust in our employers, and we put more trust in the world of work to be that kind of, I suppose, that institution that ushers in a new era. So all of this, I guess, has created a situation where what we need is reinvention, and where reinvention becomes the new norm. Now, for some reason, whenever I think about career reinvention, it might be because I'm a child of the 80s, but I always think about Madonna, because to me, she's a really good example of someone who has reinvented themselves many times in their career. And so I guess the question for us today to think about is, you know, how do we become a bit more Madonna-like? How do we build a different mindset around our skills and around our ability to continually evolve our careers? And then also, how can we build our organizations to be places where people can experience reinvention and perhaps have multiple different phases of their career, maybe within the same organization? So my thoughts on this then, and you know, I would say it very much starts with mindset. I'm a psychologist by training, so I always start with mindset. But I think in this particular instance, we really do need to adopt a new mindset around our careers and around our skills. And I think, you know, the first piece is this idea that, you know, many of us grow up with, and I think we are actually socialized to believe from a very young age that we will enter the world of work, we'll choose a profession, we'll move up the ranks. You know, in parallel to that, we'll probably have a very planned out personal life. We'll maybe get married, we'll maybe have a family. And, you know, and then our expectations are often not met, because the reality is that life and that our careers can be a lot more messy than that. So I think this shift towards pursuing a much more diverse portfolio of interests and embracing that mess is the way forward. For those of us that are maybe in vulnerable situations at the minute, or where our organizations are going through downsizing, I think, you know, the old way of, well, let's just wait and see what happens and hopefully I'll get a payoff. Again, I think there's room now for a new thinking around, well, how can I take a more proactive approach and own my career journey? One that I definitely relate to, rushing from one role to the next with lots of urgency and focus. I definitely have been guilty of this myself in the past. And I think in future, we need to get more comfortable with embracing the transition period, or the liminal period, as we psychologists sometimes call it. And this can be that period of increasing uncertainty and vulnerability where you really want to have some answers, but actually dwelling in that phase can be really beneficial, because often that's where the unexpected idea comes from, or the unexpected opportunity. When it comes to skills, I think, you know, in the past, maybe we have moved through our careers just not really knowing ourselves that well and hoping that the skills we have will be good enough, to one in future where I think we need to be very much on top of that, really know ourselves fully and know what we need to be investing in to continue to grow. And then, rather than seeing learning as something that happens to you and that your company maybe offers, again, I think owning that and seizing every opportunity to grow. And sometimes the opportunities that don't at first appear like learning, you know, it doesn't always have to be a formal course or something that you're, you know, investing in specifically. It could be volunteer work. It could be, you know, it could even just be reading a different newspaper or accessing some different content online to what you normally do. And then the final piece of this mindset shift that I think is really important is trying to avoid the unknown and being quite risk adverse and feeling fearful about change, to seeing change as something that can be really beneficial and becoming almost entrepreneurs of change, if you like. So people who really embrace it. So if that's the mindset piece, then I also think there is a behavioral piece. And what I've summarized here is, and this is based on a lot of different research, which shows there are certain behaviors that are characteristic of a lifelong learner. So characteristic of someone who moves through life expecting to always grow, to embrace new things and to learn new things. And this is consistent across industries, across levels. These skills are, if you can master these right, they will serve you well in pretty much any situation. So first of all, curiosity, that inner 5-year-old that is buried deep down in all of us, that asks why at every turn. I think, again, unearthing some of that in these times of, of change can be really helpful, because often by asking the unexpected question or the difficult question, you can find new avenues and you can find new opportunities to grow. The second one is around connectedness, and this isn't just about networking, which has become more difficult in recent times, but it's also about the connections that that you're making for other people, that you're making to information sources. So the more that you can build those networks, the better. And I think really taking time to consider that, and also to seek out the people in your network or in your sphere who are maybe different to you, can be really important. Grit, again, sometimes it's called resilience. I prefer to call it grit, because I think resilience sometimes is about just coping through difficult times, whereas I like to think grit is a more positive attribute. And again, I think lots of different ways that we can build this skill, and that we can foster it in our teams as well. So grit, another one. Adaptability, we have the chameleon, picture of a chameleon here. How do we become more flexible, try new things? When we sense that feeling of resistance in ourselves to a new situation, can we push through that and adapt to new situation? And then the final skill, which I've talked a little bit already with relation to leaders, but I think applies to everyone, is emotional intelligence. So again, and I often get into debates often with other psychologists about, can emotional intelligence be trained, or is it something that you either have or you don't? And I'm very much of the firm belief that you can learn this, you can practice skills of emotional intelligence. And again, a really important skill to help you move through some of those periods of transition, uncertainty with more ease. And if that's thinking about us as individuals, then I wanted to spend just a few minutes also exploring this through an organizational lens, because I know many of you joining today are in roles, you maybe work in HR, or you may be in a leadership position, and I think we have a duty to our workforce to be building organizations where people are not seen as, at LHH we talk about replaceable to renewable. So let's not just focus on firing and hiring and seeing people as, okay, they've got this set of skills, we put them in this box, and if that no longer fits, we find someone else. But actually to embracing more of a growth mindset and recognizing that there's huge opportunity to to help people renew and reinvent within the organization. And again, some of this starts with a mindset shift, and this time it's more of an organizational mindset. And some of the features of this include moving from, as I said, that kind of firing and hiring, and in some situations actually what we see is hiring back the very people that 6 or 12 months ago you fired, to one where you are reducing some of that activity and investing more in the current workforce, whether that's through skilling them in new behaviors, new technical skills, or giving them opportunity to move within the organization. I think this idea of people either fit or they don't, and we talk about here like separating the wrong people in inverted commas, to actually recognizing the huge potential in people, and where's your leadership pipeline coming, and what does your leader of the future look like, and where might they currently be within the organization. And we've done a lot of financial modeling around this mindset shift as well, and actually not just on an employer brand where there can be a huge positive impact, but also just the numbers add up as well. Often it's a much more cost-effective approach to invest in your current workforce, rather than going down the costly route of restructuring and hiring and firing. So, you know, if that's the kind of organizational mindset shift is needed, I think there's also an individual mindset shift needed as well. In my last few minutes before we open up for questions, let me finish with really, I guess, my top tips, which sums up some of what I've been talking about. And then I am really keen to hear any questions that you might have. But my first top tip is about making time for regular self-reflection. I think particularly during times of uncertainty, and it's likely that, you know, uncertainty will now become our new normal for maybe for good, that taking time to really consider what do you want from your career, where are there opportunities to pivot, to learn new skills, can be really beneficial. In some of our research looking at what helps people when they leave an organization, what helps them land a new job quickly, there's some really powerful statistics around the impact of journaling. So even journaling for 10 minutes a day can help you to find a new job because you're in the right frame of mind. My important add-on to this is that talking it out with others adds another level of impact, because it's often through crafting that story and sharing it with others that you get really clear about what it is you want to do with your life or with your career, or even in that particular situation. So self-reflection, but then share it. I've already talked a little bit about network and seeking out those with diverse perspectives. I think networks and forums like this are incredibly powerful, and, you know, also making sure you follow up, and is there someone that you can also invite to join, or someone that you met at one of these events that you want to connect to another person. I just think that the contagious impact that can have is amazing. I've then included something here about mental default settings, and I've sort of touched on this in a subtle way throughout. But, you know, as human beings, as creatures of habit, we form these very defined ways of thinking. And often when it comes to reimagining our career, it can be difficult to move outside of those mental default settings. So my tip is to try and find everyday ways to break up some of your mental default settings. Now, the good thing with that is that we're living in a time where our mental default settings are already being broken a little bit. So we're not taking the typical commute to work. We're probably not in the same routine every day as we would have been a year ago. So the more you can do that, the more it actually helps your brain become more flexible. The skills piece, again, we've talked about this a little bit, but just to recap and to summarize, I think, you know, focusing in on those skills that aren't going to be disappearing, that are going to serve you well throughout your career, and then owning your development of these. So not waiting for someone else to take an interest and to develop them in you, but actually being proactive about that in of itself. And then this final idea was to develop many possible selves. And again, there's been lots of research done on the power of considering different selves and different future selves. And really the thinking behind this is that if we're entering a new era of work where we're going to be required to reinvent and explore different paths, the more that we can imagine all of the different possible incarnations of ourselves, the better. And then is there an opportunity to experiment on the side with some of those? So I have mostly worked in the corporate world through my whole career. My passion and my reason for spending many years studying psychology was I believe that we as human beings can get so much more out of the world of work. So the corporate environment has been a natural home for me, but I have always thought about and toyed with the idea of doing something in the not-for-profit sector. So recently I had the opportunity of a friend and former client of mine asked me to join the board of a not-for-profit that she has set up in New York. And I jumped at the opportunity because I thought, well, here's an opportunity to experiment with a future possible self. So that's one idea there. So that's the end of my slides. I will stop screen sharing so that I can see all of your lovely faces a little bit more, and then hand over to Sarah, who I think is going to field some questions.
Great, thank you very much, Mary Claire, for those insights. We do have our first question, which I'll read out to you now. So I'm noticing that many people in caregiving positions, young children or elderly parents, are still in the survival firefighting mode. They can find it difficult to stand back and reflect. Have you advice for this group? And also, is the Adecco report public? Excellent insights.
Yeah, great question. And by the way, guys, talking about the unexpected, I'm having a little bit of work done on my house and the builders have just turned up and started hammering. So if it gets too noisy, tell me and I will go and ask them politely to be quiet. But let's see how we go. Yeah, really great question. I think one of my points of advice would be to talk to your manager about is there opportunities for more flexibility. That's certainly something I've been encouraging with my team. Many of whom have got kids at home is, you know, can they work maybe different hours so that they've still got some time for themselves? I've been really emphasizing this with my team is, how are you making time for yourself to do some of that reflection? But also I think some of it is about, it doesn't need to be, you know, 1 hour going for a nice leisurely walk or any of that. Even just having 5 minutes to, you know, to sit with how you're feeling can be really powerful. We actually did a webinar at LHH at the beginning of the pandemic, and it was a good friend of mine who's a clinical psychologist and a relationship psychologist who joined me for that, and it's available online, so we can definitely share the link. And she gives some really good tips here about how do you balance all of this. And one of her great tips was actually just spending 10 minutes once a week to sit and just feel, and don't force it and don't have any expectations, but just to sit with how you're feeling. And I think, you know, I think that can be a really good start. Yes, the Adecco report is available publicly, so we can send around the link to that as well. And there's a lot more detail than what I just shared.
Great. So next question here coming through. So Mary Claire, with regard to changing careers, how do you do it without taking a step back, but leverage your existing experience, even if it is in a different space?
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts here. So one, you know, it's interesting, the question, even the language around taking a step back. And I completely get it, because I have thought that many times as well. One of my passions outside of work is horses, and I've often thought about combining psychology with horses. And to be honest, one of the things that does hold me back as well, if I went off and did that, would that be a step back in my career? And again, it comes back to this idea that we have from birth that you always have to be making forward progress. But who's to say that taking a pay cut or taking a lower level role in a different industry is a step back? Like, maybe we need to reframe that and think of it as, you know, that could be a step forward. Now, obviously, you know, sometimes there's a financial piece there where you need a certain level of salary to, you know, to pay the bills and pay the mortgage. But I think challenging this notion of stepping back would be my first thing. And then I think to that piece about, you know, what can you experiment with on the side? And again, you know, I've got lots of individuals that I've worked with over the years who have managed to maybe ease themselves out of one career and into another, kind of over a gradual time period. And whether it's through doing some, you know, volunteering or shadowing or part-time study, so that it's not just quite a drastic shift from one to the other. That would be my thoughts on that one.
Great. Okay, so another one here. Great insights. Thank you. One of the big challenges I see with senior coaching clients is around flexibility and adaptability. Any suggestions on how to develop this? Thanks.
Yeah, another great question. And I mean, so my training as, you know, as a psychologist was mostly in the field of personality psychology. And so I definitely believe that there are some individuals who are more predisposed from a personality point of view to being flexible and being adaptable. And I think life experiences can also have an impact there. But there are definitely ways that you can learn this and that you can train it. I mean, again, I'm all for thinking about what are the little daily behaviors that start to help us be more fluid or more flexible with the way we think about things. So could it be, you know, driving a different way to go and pick the kids up from school, or it could be, you know, getting in touch with someone who you haven't spoken to in a long time, who has a very different perspective to you, and suspending judgment and having a conversation with them about what they're doing. You know, another good one, which someone challenged me on recently, was about and this was when I was living in America, read a article from the opposite side of the political belief spectrum and try and get on board with their mindset. Now, I find that quite challenging. Without naming politicians, you can probably guess what I'm referring to. But that, I think, is all really helpful in terms of us becoming more flexible. And then also, like, again, in your personal life, are there things that you can do? I mean, I had a great deal of my adaptability challenged this year because I happened to get sort of, I don't like to say stranded because I love being in Ireland, but I did get stranded here because of the travel ban, and my adaptability was really really tested. But what I'm taking from that is the next time I'm in a situation, whether it be a career or personal situation where I'm challenged in this way, I think that my flexibility muscle has definitely increased as a result. So again, is there, are there things that you can do every day that can just help to I suppose expose you to more of that adaptable situation?
Great. Okay, so I think we've probably got time maybe just for one more question, Mary Claire, before we move to Roisin. So you mentioned the liminal phase in a previous slide. Can you elaborate on what you mean? The reality of the current situation is that internal moves are probably the more secure option. So I'm wondering if this is useful in that period when you know you need to change roles, but don't necessarily want to change companies.
Yeah, so a couple of things there. One, I think on the liminal phase, so this is really, there's a great thinker called William Bridges who has published a lot on transitions, and I can really, really recommend. He has this simple transition model, which I have found incredibly useful at different parts of my career. And he talks about the endings and the new beginnings, and then this period in the middle, which is the kind of like really unexpected time. It's almost like the transition from one state to the other, and it can feel very uncertain and very volatile and very unnerving, and I think we have to get better at residing within that, just sitting within that. And exactly to the question that was posed, maybe taking a role within your current company is a good way to navigate that transition period. And I think provided you do that with an open mind about, this in fact could be an amazing new beginning, but being open to what might come as a result of that, then yes, I think that's a really, perfectly reasonable way to navigate that in-between stage.
That's great, Mary Claire. We have a few more questions, but unfortunately, I don't think we have any more time. So I'm going to have to move over to Roisin now, if that's okay. Thank you.
No problem. I'll just share my screen. I'm sharing the right one. That might be a little bit too much. Let me know if that's okay. So I'm Roisin Brennan. I was invited by Sarah today to come on and to give this talk, and it was something that I'm absolutely delighted to do. And just to sort of take you through a little bit about my career, how, where I've come from, how I've got there, and hopefully just share some tips that I have learned along the way. So I live in Drogheda. I have two children, Leah and Owen. Leah is 25. She's currently just moved to the UK for a master's in music. And Owen is 16, who's currently in 5th year and really struggling with that whole back to school and the carrying of the books. We've two dogs, Henry and Bobby, and I live with my partner Ken. So that's just a little snapshot into my family. When I was asked to do this, I struggled myself really to think about what do I really talk, what do I really say about myself, and so I really had to sit down and think about my story and how do I get that across, and sort of how do I help people and share my insights into some of the things that I've had to do. So I started my career in procurement, but it was purely by chance. And I had been working in a freight company, and I had been asked by a former colleague who had just moved to IBM, would I be interested in applying for a role there? And that was back in 1999. At the time, I was a single mother. I had a daughter at the time. She would have been 3, and I started in that role with absolutely no experience. And so one of the things that I did before going on that interview was to do some research and to find the buzzwords that I thought they might be interested in. And I remember going for the interview and getting the role and absolutely being beside myself that I was absolutely able to do this. And so I ended up staying in IBM for 14 years, and I had a various amount of different roles. And in some cases I didn't have the right skill sets initially, but I did have the drive, and I really took the initiative to look for the opportunities within the company. And one of the biggest drivers was because I was a single mother and I had my daughter to look after, and so I wanted to progress my career as quickly as I could. And so some of the key roles that I started off within IBM, you know, I worked my way up, and at the time IBM was very big into, you know, encouraging people to have mentors, and I learned very early on in my career that one of the things for me was key was to find a mentor. And it could have been, you know, I didn't look for a man or a woman, but most of my mentors have ended up being men. And I've had a really great experience having them as mentors. And so I didn't always, you know, search out that woman to be my mentor. As I progressed my career through IBM, I eventually got into procurement, and the roles I had done, I had slightly touched on. And one of the things I recognized about myself in that was that I had this great capacity to connect with people, and sort of to sit down and sort of do a trade, do a negotiation. And so really that's what procurement is about. And so I learned that about myself very early on. The role then, I decided to leave IBM in 2014, and that was a major step because I had been in this company for 14 years. I had grown my career there. I was, you know, it was a very safe environment, and I decided to take that leap and to leave. And I had more or less hit the ceiling, and I didn't really know where my next role was going to come from. And I wanted to make sure that I didn't get stuck there. And just stay in the same role, and I did have this drive to really figure out where I could go in my career and what I could do next. And a lot of the time I was absolutely scared out of my wits to do this, and but I knew that if I didn't and I missed that opportunity, I would always regret it. So I left IBM, and a former manager that I had worked with was working in a company at the time called Activist, which is now Allegan and has since been acquired by AbbVie. And I started in that company as associate director, and I remember getting the title and I'm thinking, oh my God, how far have I come? And sort of really thinking and sitting back, and I remember getting the text message from the hiring manager to say, we're delighted to offer you the role. And I remember sitting down thinking, you know, really just reflecting on, how did I get here? You know, how I had a fear of, actually, I'm not going to be able to do this job. I'm going to be found out. I just, you know, but I had to put that aside. And so when I joined that company, there was a lot of room for growth, and the manager I worked under was incredible. And there was also my second line manager, who was a woman, an Icelandic woman, and she was fantastic. She had a completely different way of doing things. It was a different approach to business. The pharma world is very different to the technology world. And so a different way of learning was opened up to me, and a different way of progressing. And I progressed quite quickly in that role through my time there, and I ended up as the executive director, and I managed quite a big team across different locations, and I traveled quite a bit in that role and learned a substantial amount about myself, about the type of person I was in terms of my resilience and some of the things that and challenges that I needed to overcome in order to really, you know, be the best that I could within those roles. And then in 2018, I had, while I was there, I had been involved in a lot of acquisitions, and the company had grown. And through that, there's a lot of self-reflection, and so I was always on the acquiring side. So I had to, you know, go out to these companies and interview people, and, you know, decide, you know, quite quickly if I wanted to hire them or keep them, and that I found that quite difficult, because you know, as a person that really likes to relate to people, it wasn't a side of the role that I really liked to do, even though I had this incredibly large team. And so the opportunity came up for me to leave Allegan, and I took it. And I remember feeling at the time I didn't know what I was going to do. I had been operating at such a high level. I had been traveling back and forth to the States every 2 weeks. My whole day was taken up with just work. And then that stopped. And I didn't really know what I was going to do. I didn't know where my next career move was going to come from. I didn't know what I wanted my next career move to be. And as part of the redundancy package, I had some time with the LHH team, and I can only say that was an absolute incredible experience for me, both as a professional, as a woman, and just really as somebody coming out of the corporate environment and then being put into this environment of, now I've got my whole day in front of me, I don't know what to do with myself. And so I have to say, the team, Pam, Sarah, and Laura, who was my coach, I learned so much about myself in that time. And just coming back to a little bit about what Mary Claire had said earlier, I had the time to really sit down and reflect about myself, and to really reflect about what did I want to do and what did my next steps wanted to be. But I wouldn't have been able to do that without the help of the LHH team, because I had never done that before in my career, and I was quite scared. And so as I go through and think about some of the challenges that I've had in my career, I mean, I think starting out seriously, when I started out, as I said, I was a single parent. It was back in 1999. I was, you know, there was no working from home. You were in the 9-to-5 job, and all of the challenges that comes with that childcare, and, you know, leaving kids in crashes and stuff. And thank God, I think, you know, while we're all working from home, I do think you know, we are trying to juggle kids and offices and meetings and all of that, but it's a great time, I think, even for kids to have parents at home, and sort of to ease that guilt that I think many women feel about working full time all of the time. I definitely felt throughout my career, as I progressed through roles and got promoted, every time I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be found out now, I'm not going to be able to do this role. And so I really had to overcome that myself and think, actually, I wouldn't have been hired if I couldn't do the role, and I wouldn't have got promoted if I wasn't good at what I was doing. And so I constantly had to remind myself of that. And I found that hard. I still find that hard sometimes, but it's something that I just try to manage myself. The profession that I started off was very male dominated, particularly IBM was. It was very, very, you know, there was, I would say 99% of the roles that were filled were by men. And so that was difficult, because, you know, as a young woman starting off, I was always very conscious of, you know, how am I portraying myself. I remember thinking one day, dressing and you know, putting clothes on, thinking, is this respectful enough? And thank God we've moved on from that, as you know, as we move on through our careers. Thank God we've moved on from that, because I did find that a challenge. I think not being heard and being pigeonholed, I think that's something that I struggled with initially in my career. I still struggle with that. Even in my previous role, and even in my current role, sometimes I think I'm just not, you know, I need to figure out how I'm going to be heard. I need to figure out how my team can be heard at you know, at the top level, and it's trying to manage that expectation of my manager and my team, and then not receiving feedback. And this was early on in my career where I didn't ask for feedback, and I was nearly intimidated and afraid to ask for feedback, and sometimes I still struggle with that. Sometimes I'm thinking I want to know, but I don't want to know, and I think that feeds into a little bit of the fear of being found out, and I do still struggle with that a little bit, and sometimes maybe feeling a little bit undervalued, and so, you know, how do you overcome that? And you know, I think again it comes back to your mindset of, you know, you're in the role because you are good enough to be in that role, and so you know, if you think about everything that you've achieved within your personal life, all the struggles that you've overcome, you know, there's a lot that you can take into your current workplace and really think about, you know, how have I coped, not just in the work situations, but also in personal situations. Some of the lessons that I have certainly learned is don't talk yourself out for applying for the roles, whether it's internally or externally, if you don't tick all the boxes. And so I learned this quite early on in my career, particularly in Allegan, from one of the mentors, a lady that I had, and she said, if you don't know, if you don't tick all the boxes and you take 90% or 60% or 70%, take the role. If there's something in the role that you think you're going to be able to grow and learn, take the role and you'll figure it out as you go. And that has been very true for me throughout my career. It's something that I've really done, because as I said, when I started out, I didn't have any experience, but I took the opportunity to, and every opportunity that came to me, I took it and sort of and grew into the role and learned as I went. One of the things I would say is keep a list of your transferable skills and add these to the list as you go and move roles. And sometimes you can forget about, you know, your transferable skills. It's important that you remember those skills and you carry them with you. And when you are applying for those roles, whether it's internally or externally, you know, think about actually, you know, situations that you've been in, projects that you may have worked on, the skills that you needed, and think about how you will apply them for the role that you're going to. And I think that does help build confidence and also the mindset of, actually, I can do this role. I don't have all the skills, but I can absolutely certainly do it. And one of the other things I would say is don't be afraid to make the mistakes. And when you make them, own them, and then have the courage to fix them. And this can be applied in many different settings. And I apply this sometimes in some of the projects that I've worked on, and certainly in some of the hires in hiring people. And sometimes you hire people and they just don't work out, and it may be just for a variety of different reasons. Don't be afraid to fix that. If you are working with people, if you're working with a manager, if you're working on a project, or if you're in a role, and you've made that mistake, don't be afraid to fix that mistake and have the courage to do it, because at the end of, on the other side of that, is something that's much more suited to you, or there may be somebody else that you're going to hire into that role that's much more suited to the environment, and it's better for them and it's better for you. So that's one of the things I have definitely learned. And then the other thing is find a mentor, have the regular catch-ups, bounce ideas, ask for help, choose the person, not the gender. And what I mean by that is sometimes we can get caught up as women of, I need a woman to be that mentor. And what I have certainly learned is that in my case, that is not true. I have had some fantastic male mentors and have got great insights into them. So I think a mentor can be somebody that's in your company, that's outside your company, somebody that, you know, it may be working in a career that you want to get into, it may be somebody in your network, and, you know, it's just finding that person that you can really go to have those and bounce those ideas off. The next one I would say is build and grow your network. I learned this very late into my career, and I learned it thanks to the team in LHH. And really about, you know, your network is building your network, keeping your network going. You know, being involved in this today is fantastic. I will definitely, you know, be joining this network. I didn't know this network was available, so I'm delighted because I've learned something completely new today that I'm absolutely going to join up. I'm going to encourage people within my network to join, because I think this is fantastic. And that was really one of the things that the LHH team really helped me with, is understanding the importance of your network and growing your network and helping you do that. And I have to say, when I came in every Wednesday to sit with Laura, and we would sit down and we talk about that, and it was something that has resonated with me so strongly, and something that I do encourage my own team now is to build their network. And then the last thing I would just say is just be true to yourself. And as long as you're true to yourself, you can't go wrong. And the reason why I say this, I don't know if many people are familiar with the colors program. And so you look at, you know, whether you're a red or a blue or a green color, and it's about your personality traits. And one of the things that I learned going through this, and I've done a few of them, is like what my color is and what my opposite color is. And one of the girls that I worked with, a colleague of mine, came to me after she had done her colors, and she says, "Oh my God, I'm such a color," and she was devastated that she was this color, and she wanted to be a different color. And I said, but why would you want to be that? And her expectation was she had to be that color in order to get on in her career. And so she's seen the color that she was selected as being somebody that showed weakness. And I just thought, but that's not who you are. You have to be true to yourself, because if you're not true to yourself, that comes across. And so you're not seen as being authentic, and you need to be seen to be authentic in any roles and in dealings that you have with people. And then the last thing is ask for feedback. I'm still not great at this, and something that I definitely need to get better at doing. But if you don't ask for feedback, you've no reference whether you're doing a good, bad, or indifferent job. And we all need the feedback. And so what I'd also say is, make sure you give feedback to your team. There may be people on your team that are afraid to ask for the feedback because they may not want to know whether they're doing that good or bad job. But without the feedback, we can progress. And so that's one of the things I would say, and certainly something that I have learned. And finally, celebrate the wins, no matter how big or small. And I would say this is something that I do much more now. It's not something that I've done quite a lot. And I was always looking for the next leap, the next jump. And when I sit back now and I look at some of the little things, the little wins, and I think I didn't really celebrate that, and I should have. And so no matter how big or small it is, whether it's a personal achievement, whether it's a team achievement, or whether it's just something, you know, some feedback that you've got, you know, celebrate it, embrace it, and you know, just check in with yourself on it, and just think about, you know, what does that give you. And again, for your teams, you know, it's something that I certainly try to do with my team, is really to celebrate the wins and really encourage them in this time, because it's so, you know, it's such a turbulent time for everybody. And whether it's, you know, I got my kids to school on time and I got back for that meeting on time, or I got my kids to school but I was late for the meeting, but my kids got to school on time, that's a win. And it's a win whether it's on a personal level or a career level. So that's really it for me. I'll stop sharing if there's any questions.
That's great, Roisin. Thanks so much for sharing that with us. Just checking the chat now. So okay, so we have a question here, Roisin. Maybe you could kind of give a little bit of advice here. So when there is a situation, you provided the solution for a problem, still the higher management did not approve it. because they think I'm not experienced enough or great at making decisions. How do you handle this situation? Should I stay kind of quiet, or should I try and get my point across? So
you know, that's a great question, and something that, you know, I myself have come up against. And you know, when you feel that you're not, you know, you're inexperienced, or the person that you're reporting into, or the person at the senior management level is you know, much more, you know, I don't know what the word is, just, you know, maybe better able to make these decisions. That's not always the case. What I would say is, absolutely don't stay quiet. If you believe that you have found a solution to the problem, it's just a matter about trying to make the time, and maybe and sit down with this person and really take them through, you know, this is the issue, this is the solution, I think this is what's going to work. And maybe it's the senior manager or the higher level management team didn't approve it because they didn't understand it. And so what I would say is, sometimes, even if you are dealing with people at senior levels, doesn't mean that they're going to get the solution, because maybe you're more in the detail. And so sometimes you just need to lay it out slightly differently. So I think if you're confident that you found the solution, absolutely take it to them, and maybe just book, you know, a 5-minute room or a 5-minute chat with them, and just say, look, I really think this solution is going to work. Let me talk you through why I think that solution is going to work.
Great, thanks, Roisin. We've got, I think, time maybe for one more question. So you spoke about being found out. I myself and so many other women I know often have that imposter syndrome feeling when applying or starting new roles. How do you overcome that feeling?
Yeah, I mean, and it's, you know, it's such a terrible feeling, right? It's such a terrible feeling, and I mean, how do you overcome it? And you know, how I've done it in the past, and how I still do it today. And you know, I'll give you an example. I was presenting to my board on Tuesday, and the meeting was running over, and I had all these slides prepared that had taken, you know, about 2 weeks, and I had prepped and changed. And then I got to the board meeting, they were running late, and I got 5 minutes, and I came out feeling, oh my God, I have just made an absolute mess of that presentation. And I was thinking, I must have come across like a baboon. And then I had to step back and think, actually, they wouldn't have asked me to present if they didn't think I was good enough. And so you have to remind yourself that you are where you are because you're good enough. And it's the little nagging voice, and it's trying to quieten that voice in your head, and it's really thinking about, actually, I'm in the role because I'm capable of doing that job, and I'm, you know, you have to tell yourself that you are capable of doing the job because you're doing the job that you're in, and you've been hired to do that job. And if they didn't think you were good enough, you wouldn't have got the job in the first place. And so it's really about sort of trying to dampen that inner voice in your head, and thinking to yourself, I'm good enough to be here. I'm good enough to be here. I'm good enough to be in this job. And you have to tell yourself over and over again. But I will say it's a horrible feeling, and I do get it. Not as much as I used to, but I do still get it, absolutely.
And Sarah, if I could just add one thing here, because this really resonates with me as well. But one thing that really helped me with this was when I found out that it's only successful, capable people that get this feeling. If you're a low performer and you're not that good at your job, you won't get imposter syndrome. So when I read that, there was some big research that was carried out, and I thought, like, that gave me comfort, because I thought, well, and it's really echoing Roisin's point, well, if I wasn't good at my job, I wouldn't be feeling this way. So that's the only bit I would add to that, because it gave me some comfort.
Great, thanks, Mary Claire. Just one little note in for Roisin here. It's not a question, just a comment as well. Thank you, Roisin, for sharing your story with such honesty and openness. Very inspirational. So on that point, I'm going to pass back over to the PWN.
Sarah, thank you so much. Thanks always to LHH. They've been fantastic supporters of PWN Dublin. Particularly, you mentioned Reinvention earlier, Mary Claire. This has definitely been a year of reinvention for us. Mary Claire, Roisin, thank you so much. Phenomenal presentation. We're getting some super feedback through on the chat. Love the way you mentioned volunteering, Mary Claire. You may know or may not know that the entire team in PWN Global and PWN Dublin are all volunteers. So this network could not exist without volunteers and also our corporate partners. And Roisin, I think, as Mary Claire referenced earlier about grit, as you were talking, it was the one word just kept coming into my head. So congratulations on your career to date. It's been phenomenal. And I think your real story and your absolute honesty has been very inspirational to all of our team on the call today. Our theme this year was actually advancing your career in a new decade. So that's been fabulous. One final thing, I just call on my colleague Jana, who's just going to share our next set of events. It's always a lovely time at the end of this just to get a sense. We have a couple of more events coming up between now and the end of the year. So Jana, I'll hand over there to Seb. But thank you so much to everyone for attending today. And thanks so much for engagement and for your questions.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so I think that there's a few things in there that has resonated with a few of us. So even the question at the end that Roisin was talking about, the imposter syndrome, that's the advice I've gotten before as well. They hired you because they saw something in you. So you're there for a reason. But yeah, so I think we can all take a little bit out of that. And there's a few great events coming up that I think kind of fit into the theme that we around kind of the moving the dial and kind of figuring out in terms of kind of changing that. What does it mean to have, like, what's your next career? So we have an event in State Street on October 22nd that is limited. So if people are still thinking they need to go through the registration to just ensure if there's still any spaces left. There's a great event, the Global Diversity Lab. So last year there was it was linked to the awards, which unfortunately this year are not happening, but hopefully will happen next year. And we can all meet in person and celebrate. So there's just to go through the same way and through the registration to ensure that you can get your tickets. And one very good event coming up with Aoife Donegan, which would fit into the idea of making yourself look great in the new way, right? So if we're all on that same size square on the screen, what does it mean, and how do you make yourself impactful to the person that you're talking to, be it one person or being a whole group or globally, how some of the events that we have are. There's already preparation happening for Q1 for next year. There's the mentoring that is going to kick off in Q1 that we're finalizing the dates. And there's a collaboration that is going to happen in Q1 with the CAAM as well. So there's lots happening, and one point in terms of kind of these are more, I guess, Dublin based, but there's a lot of things happening in the global side that I would advise people to kind of keep an eye on in terms of events. And one major one that I would like to highlight is the Working World 2021 and beyond. So it's a full day event on the 12th of November. There is a fee for members as well, but it is a full day, and there's lots of things that we can take in terms of kind of the work and how we'll work in the new digital, take into account that some companies are already thinking of going working full time from home up to September next year. So taking a whole year of doing this, you know, we need to know the skills in terms of how do we do this for another year. So I think there's lots of things coming up. So do follow us on kind of in terms of kind of other social media, in terms of LinkedIn, Instagram. There's the posts are always going up, but do make sure that also you're looking out for the events in the calendar for PWM. And thanks for joining today. Fiona, did you have anything else?
That's it. Thank you so much, Anna. I'm conscious it's just after 2, so